It was a day when terror came to America. But one flying bomb, United Airlines Flight 93, never reached its target.
He said, we're going to have to do something. And he hung up.
I saw just a silver streak nosediving to the ground, and then a huge explosion.
Now, with information from the cockpit recorder, the passengers and the crew.
Everybody who knew Sandy loved Sandy.
The hijackers.
He would have been the perfect recruit for that sort of purpose because he knew how to get along in an urban setting.
And what happened in the final moments of United Airlines Flight 93.
I heard commotion and screams and hollers of terror. I could hear men hollering and women screaming in the background.
These images and memories are now indelibly sealed on America's psyche. September 11th, 2001, a hijacked jetliner strikes the North Tower of New York's World Trade Center. 18 minutes later, another jet hits the South Tower. And 37 minutes later, a third hijacked jet crashes into the Pentagon in Washington. But as 3 passenger planes turned into deadly missiles of destruction, a fourth was apparently headed for the nation's capital.
It would have struck either the Capitol or the White House.
As potential targets on the ground in Washington were frantically evacuated, no one knew that on board Flight 93, 40 heroic passengers and crew were about to change the outcome of an evil plot.
3 people had taken over the plane, 2 had knives, and they had locked themselves into the cockpit. One other person had a bomb strapped around his waist.
The hijackers were desperate men.
This is an operation that would make even a person with nerves of steel extremely nervous and anxious.
As tension mounted aboard the ill-fated flight, passengers reached out by phone to loved ones.
And he said, I just wanted to tell you that I love you.
A last-ditch plan was revealed.
She said, we're in the back of the airplane. We're getting hot water together to throw on them.
Flight 93 crashed in Pennsylvania. We all know that everyone aboard perished. Yet the full account of what happened aboard Flight 93 is just coming to light.
You can almost see in your mind a struggle for control.
In that struggle, the control yoke is pushed forward, pulled back. In the struggle, the airplane just goes out of control.
On the morning of September 11th, flight attendant Sandy Bradshaw arrived at Newark Airport ready to go to work on United Flight 93. Phil Bradshaw, a pilot for another airline, was married to Sandy for 11 years.
Sandy was a beautiful person, very people-oriented, loved to talk to people. She'd talk to anybody. She was sweet. She was the best mom in the whole world. She straightened me out. I can't say enough nice things about Sandy. Everybody who knew Sandy loved Sandy.
The Bradshaws took turns flying and looking after their children, 2-year-old Alexandria and Nathan, almost 1. It seemed they never had enough time together.
Monday afternoon, I came in off my trip. I got into the airport at 1:20, and she caught the 1:50 flight to Newark. We saw each other in the airport for about 15 minutes. And I was begging and pleading her to call in sick and not go to work.
But Sandy was dedicated to her job.
She got on with United in December of 1990, and she just loved it because she got to travel, meet people, and talk to people.
Sandy was one of 5 flight attendants looking after 37 passengers on Flight 93. No one realized that among them were 4 terrorists, later identified as Ziad al-Jarrah, Ahmed al-Nami, Ahmed al-Haznawi, and Saeed al-Hamdi. They had purchased one-way tickets. Within a few hours, the other passengers would understand why.
How do you like California?
Oh, I love it. It's great.
One of them was 38-year-old Tom Burnett. He was an executive at a San Francisco Bay Area firm that makes medical devices, returning home from a business trip one day early.
He was a good father. He was a very loving father.
All right, here we go. You guys ready to dance?
He couldn't wait to see his wife Dina and their children, twins Hallie and Madison, and the baby, Anna Claire.
Well, it was Anna Claire's first day of preschool, and so we were all very excited about that. And Tom was coming home and would be home for at least a week, and we were all looking forward to that.
Seated next to Burnett in first class was 31-year-old Mark Bingham. He had just opened a branch of his San Francisco-based public relations firm in New York. Alice Hoagland is his mother.
Mark was a delightful young man. He had a great many friends. I'm just discovering how many friends he had. I loved him from the moment he was conceived, and he's grown up to be a fine young man, one I'm very proud of.
The night before his flight, Mark stayed at a friend's house in New Jersey. The next morning, he overslept. When the friend, Matt Hall, dropped Mark off at the airport, he didn't know if he would make the plane.
I get onto the highway, my cell phone rings, and I look down, it's Mark, and I'm thinking, oh, he missed the plane. So I said, hey, I answered, hey, what are you doing? And he's like, good, I just want to thank you for driving to get me here. I made the plane, I'm in first class, and I'm drinking a glass of orange juice.
The terrorists spent the night before at two nearby hotels, the Airport Marriott and the Days Inn. Some of them knew it would be the last night of their lives. On the morning of the 11th, they went to the United Terminal at Newark Airport. They had no trouble checking in along with the rest of the passengers. Jeremy Glick, who was taking his first business trip since his daughter was born. Todd Beamer, a father of three and manager for a software company. And college student Nicole Miller, who was returning to California after spending a long weekend with her boyfriend Ryan Brown and his family in New Jersey. It had been her first trip east.
She was just like a little kid running around Atlantic City in New York, seeing these things that she's never seen before. You know, Statue of Liberty. I mean, she was just overwhelmed, really, with what's out there. And so it was a great experience. It was one of the best weekends we ever had.
Both Nicole and Ryan had flights back home to California on the night of the 10th that were canceled due to bad weather. The next morning, they couldn't get seats on the same flight. Ryan helped Nicole check in, then said goodbye.
Before I actually walked out the door, I turned around and she was looking at me and I said, I love you, and she said, I love you back, and I just left and went to my terminal, and that was it.
The four terrorists took their seats along with Nicole and the rest of the passengers. But Flight 93 did not take off right away. There were too many planes backed up on the runway.
Our planes were side by side on the runway right before she took off. And I was, banging on the windows, trying to see if I could see her, and I couldn't find her, but I knew it was her flight. And I saw her flight take off, and we took off. And it's kind of interesting, as we're in the air, a couple of passengers on the plane noticed smoke coming from the tray towers, but nobody really thought, much of it.
Plane went down in western Pennsylvania, in Shanksville. We stood on a hill and just looked out, and it was just mind-boggling because there was no plane, there were no bodies, there was nothing to see except for that hole. And you just stood there and thought, what happened to all the people? What happened to the plane? It was as if they just vanished. They had about 30 minutes in which they knew that this plane had been hijacked. What was it like in their final moments? Did they pray? Did they talk out loud to the people they loved? Did they look out the plane? Did they think about their children? Did they think about their husbands and their wives? I mean, you just wanted to know what it was like for them, and you just hoped that they hadn't suffered.
Among the 37 passengers on board United's Flight 93 from Newark were four men on a mission of destruction. Ziad al-Jarrah, Ahmed al-Haznawi, a man identified as Saeed al-Hamdi, and Ahmed al-Nami were determined that the flight to San Francisco would never arrive there. South Florida, the summer before the fateful flight. The four terrorists were living anonymously here.
There are a lot of people of color here, and it's a very transient area. It's not unusual to have people moving in and out of places every couple of months, and these guys were never around long enough to draw any attention. They stayed in places that didn't require background checks. They were very transient, and it fit.
Two of the men lived in a rental apartment attached to this house in Lauderdale by the Sea. The other two lived just north of Lauderdale in a short-term rental in Delray Beach.
They would dress very nondescript, usually white polo-type shirts with white pants or shorts. They were young-looking. There was nothing harsh-looking about them. There was nothing that you would think, they're weird, or there was nothing that was out of the ordinary about them. They were just very quiet.
So I just thought they were at Florida Atlantic or West Palm Community College, or possibly here for tennis too. They have tennis lessons, International Tennis School.
But actually, they were here to put the final touches on their diabolical plan. Ziad Al-Jarrah spent 3 mornings a week training at Bert Rodriguez's gym.
The class that he took was a class in close quarter aggressive and defensive tactics, which is basically used for corrections officers or federal officers who are going to be needing to just try to control somebody.
Rodriguez had no idea who Jarrah was training to control, but he sensed there was something more to him than he was letting on.
He was trying to put on the appearance of someone that was very mild-mannered. But again, as you work with someone, you can see their attitude about things, about their intent. Yeah, he was very focused on what he was doing and what he wanted to learn, and everything that he picked up. Obviously he was practicing it.
Jarrah's practice also involved weeks of training at a flight school in Venice, Florida. Just across town, 2 more men who would later play pivotal roles in the events of September 11th were also learning to fly. Mohammed Atta and Marwan Al-Shehi would each pilot one of the 2 planes that crashed into the World Trade Center.
We usually will see Atta and Al-Shehi together at the same time, and then Jarrah appearing basically in the same community. And it's obviously not coincidence that all 3 guys were moving in generally the same areas at almost exactly the same times.
Hamburg, Germany in the late 1990s was a bustling international port city, teeming with refugees, students, and political dissidents. It was the perfect recruiting ground for terrorists. It was here that Jarrah first met Mohammed Atta and Marwan Al-Shehi. The Egyptian Atta was 7 years older than Jarrah. He persuaded Jarrah to join a new cause, a band of angry and in some cases well-educated Muslims from around the world. The group saw the West, and particularly the United States, as their enemy. The band's spiritual leader was Osama bin Laden, a wealthy Saudi exile who ran training camps for terrorists in the mountains of Afghanistan. In 1993, bin Laden trainees drove a bomb into a parking garage under New York's World Trade Center. They killed 6 people and injured hundreds. But they failed to bring the buildings down. Bin Laden remained determined to try again. At first glance, Ziad Samir Al-Jarrah was an unlikely recruit for such a movement. He was born in 1975 to a prosperous family in Lebanon. His father was a civil servant in Beirut, his mother a school teacher. The family are Sunni Muslims, but not very religious. Young Ziad actually attended a Christian high school.
He went to the best schools in Lebanon. He was raised gently as he is the only boy in the family. He is the kind of lovely boy to his parents, to his family. He likes to have fun.
Still, Dr. Martha Crenshaw, a professor at Wesleyan University and an expert in hijackings and terrorism, says the key to Jarrah's joining bin Laden's forces probably lies in his childhood in Beirut.
Although he apparently came from a relatively prosperous family, Still, one could imagine that he did experience a lot of fighting and a lot of violence during his upbringing in Lebanon.
The year he was born, in 1975, was also the year that Lebanon began the 16-year civil war, and Beirut was reduced to rubble. The word suicidal bomber was coined in Beirut in 1981 in an Associated Press story.
Jarrah moved to Germany in 1996 to study as a flight engineer. It was then that he became more serious about his Muslim background.
At some point, he became dislocated, either felt that Islam was being marginalized or Muslims were being marginalized, and his feelings obviously began to harden.
At some point, Jarrah joined the group of young radicals led by Mohammed Atta. Atta organized a prayer group at his university, which officials now believe was a cover for his terrorist cell. In July 1999, Jarrah told his friends he was dropping out of school.
One day we were studying together, and in the middle of the term he asked me, "Michael, would you be sad if I ended my studies and moved to the States?" 2 weeks later, he was gone.
In fact, he was embarking on a mission that would cost him his life, along with thousands of others. That year, Jarrah began learning how to fly. He got a commercial pilot's license in Germany, listing a false address. In early 2000, Jarrah went missing for 5 months. His girlfriend believed he had gone to Afghanistan. Jarrah arrived in the United States, where he continued his flight training. He blended in perfectly in his new setting, obtaining a driver's license and buying a flashy red Mitsubishi Eclipse.
That he would have been the perfect recruit for that sort of purpose because he knew how to get along in an urban setting. He was somewhat more sophisticated, socially sophisticated apparently than some other members of the group. He was religious, but he certainly was not unfamiliar with the secular lifestyle, had apparently in Lebanon liked fast cars as well, so that he buys apparently a red car when he's here in the United States. He would know how to fit in better than some others.
Unbeknownst to everyone who met him, behind the closed door of his small beachside apartment, Jarrah, Atta, and al-Shehi were planning the crime of the century. But it would take more than these few men to do the job. As the plan moved into high gear, fresh recruits were brought in. These men would not need to be as carefully trained as Jarrah and his co-plotters.
These are the people who came into the country very late in the process and who had a very limited function, and that was to take the box cutters, cut a flight attendant's throat if need be, and move all the passengers to the rear of the plane and keep them there.
And so in June 2001, 3 more men arrived in South Florida to help Ziad al-Jarrah. Much less is known about these men, identified as Saeed al-Hamdi, Ahmed al-Nami, and Ahmed al-Haznawi. They're believed to be younger, less well-educated, from a poor and highly religious region of Saudi Arabia. They were always in pairs.
Everywhere they went, they were always together. I never saw one without the other one.
In fact, there was a good reason these men were never alone.
We certainly know that they were not trusted to be on their own. The reinforcement of having the group around, of having someone in the group with you all the time, would be essential to making sure that they maintained that group identity and that they didn't defect from the group.
In the last months before the hijackings, the group went over every detail.
I feel sure there must have been some practice runs. I would think that even the newcomers, even the less skilled, the cannon fodder, we might even call them, would have needed some preparation so that they would not appear too nervous. Because this is an operation that would make, I would think, even a person with nerves of steel extremely nervous and anxious.
In late August, Jarrah's group bought airline tickets for Flight 93 from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, leaving at 8 a.m. on September 11th. They stayed at a Marriott hotel and a Days Inn near Newark Airport on the night of September 10th. There, Ziad al-Jarrah's group made their final preparations. According to a letter of instruction found at the crash scene in Pennsylvania, they prayed for a successful mission.
It's basically become known as the last night letter. It's a 4-page sort of summary about how to prepare, shave all your body hair, make sure your weapons are prepared for the slaughter, and pray expect a response from the people on the plane. Be calm and to know that heaven is waiting and 72 virgins are awaiting and that kind of thing. So they were told, at least in the last night, how to prepare for it.
There is a certain routine that I think probably helps prepare them to do this, because psychologically, no matter how well they've been prepared ahead of time, how thoroughly indoctrinated, it's still going to be very hard when it comes to the last moment making that choice.
On the morning of September 11th, the four men drove to Newark Airport. They had no trouble checking in for Flight 93, even though they were carrying concealed weapons. They took their seats and prepared to die. They aimed to take thousands of Americans with them.
Pedestrians out of the street as they're looking up towards the World Trade Center. And then you looked up and all of a sudden this huge, gigantic cloud that was filled of smoke and debris started to hit me. Individuals were screaming, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." I had only gotten about 20 feet when I was just overtaken by all the debris that was raining down on us. It was only the grace of God, and that I just heard a small, still voice. It said, "Under the car," and I dove underneath the parked cars that were on the street. And I started to think of my loved ones, and I said, I can't believe I'm going to die like this underneath a car.
United Flight 93 left the gate right on time, but heavy runway traffic kept the Boeing 757 on the ground for 40 minutes. No one knew it at the time, but that delay saved hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives. Flight 93 finally took off. 6 minutes later, while the jet was still climbing towards its cruising altitude, hijackers who had taken over American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston deliberately blasted into the North Tower of New York's World Trade Center. At the same time, hijackers in control of United Flight 175, also from Boston, were bearing down on the South Tower. Meanwhile, in the nation's capital, a third airliner, American Airlines Flight 77, was headed towards the Pentagon. The most deadly terrorist attack against America was underway.
Once United realized that its own plane, Flight 175, had been hijacked and had likely rammed the second tower of the World Trade Center, it began sending out messages to all of its planes. The messages said things like, confirm operations are normal, beware cockpit intrusion. And United Flight 93 did respond with a one-word response, confirmed.
Unaware of the events unfolding around them, the passengers on board Flight 93 were preparing for breakfast. There were 10 sitting in first class and 27 in coach. The 4 terrorists, seated anonymously among them, were ready to make their move.
They acted as quickly as they could after the plane had reached cruising altitude. And I think there's some suspicion that they waited until the autopilot was turned on in the aircraft, which would mean that they would not risk a sudden dive to the ground because the autopilot would be flying the aircraft.
Air traffic controllers in Cleveland, monitoring communications from Flight 93, heard screams from the radio in the cockpit.
According to this Cleveland air control tape, you hear the pilot screaming, "Get out of here, get out of here." And it's obvious someone is in the cockpit at that point.
This was the first indication that hijackers had invaded the cockpit and seized the plane.
There is evidence that they did that in a most brutal way by slashing the throat of a flight attendant, binding the hands of other flight attendants, and perhaps stabbing some of the flight crew itself.
From months of training, the hijackers would have known how easy it was to overtake a pilot and co-pilot strapped into their seats.
They have no mirror. They can't see who's coming in behind them. So they would have been completely vulnerable without the ability to respond.
Shortly after the hijackers took over the flight, air traffic controllers heard a man with a thick Arabic accent attempting to address the passengers. "This is your captain. There is a bomb on board. Remain seated. We are meeting their demands and returning to the airport."
We can assume that they told them that this was just an ordinary hijacking. and that if they would just be calm and not cause any trouble, that nothing would happen to them and that everything would be all right.
2 members of the flight crew had already been injured or killed and were laid out in the front of the plane. The hijackers herded the remaining flight crew and most of the passengers into the back of the plane.
They would immediately want to get them out of the way, make sure they don't see anything more than they need to see because you want to keep them under control.
Air traffic controllers in Cleveland desperately attempted to contact the plane but could not. The only communication from the hijacked aircraft came from passengers making telephone calls. Why were they allowed to make these calls?
Imagine it's a person sitting by a window in a 3 across, and you see that they're talking on a cell phone. You, the hijacker, are going to clamber over the other 2 people to try to snatch the cell phone away from them. You certainly risk somebody tackling you at that point. If you were just thinking in terms of maintaining control, you would think, well, I'll just let them do it. There's not very much they're going to be able to do anyway.
One of the callers, Tom Burnett, phoned his wife Dina, who was watching in horror as she saw the World Trade Center destruction on television.
My immediate reaction was I asked if he was okay, and he said no. He said, I'm on the airplane. It's been hijacked. They've already knifed a guy, and they're telling us there's a bomb on board. Please call the authorities. And he hung up.
Hung up before she could tell him about the World Trade Center.
I immediately thought, who do you call for a hijacking?
Todd Beamer attempted to notify authorities with the help of GTE Airphone supervisor Lisa Jefferson.
GTE Airphone, Mrs. Jefferson speaking. How can I help you? And I asked him to explain to me exactly what was going on. He told me 3 people had taken over the plane, 2 had knives, and they had locked themselves into the cockpit. 1 other person had a bomb strapped around his waist with a red belt. And there were 2 people lying on the floor in first class. He couldn't tell if they were dead or alive, but they were hurt.
Pilot Phil Bradshaw heard similar alarming news from his wife, flight attendant Sandy Bradshaw.
She said, well, Phil, my flight has just been hijacked. And I said, what? She said, my flight has just been hijacked by 3 guys with knives. And I couldn't believe it. She said, I don't know who's flying the airplane. I know we've turned around. We're over a river somewhere.
Flight 93 was flying over the outer banks of Lake Erie when the jet made this sudden U-turn.
At that point, the plane started to fly erratic. He raised his voice slightly and said, we're going down, we're going down. No, wait, we're coming back up. We're turning around, we're headed north. At this point, I don't know where we're going.
In fact, at that point, the plane was headed southeast. 3 minutes later, American Airlines Flight 77 struck the Pentagon. Immediately, every airport in the country was ordered closed, and all flights in the air were ordered to land. Flight 93, however, kept heading southeast. Someone in the cockpit even filed a new flight plan. The final destination, Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C., only a short distance away from the nation's capital.
The presumption, and it's only a presumption, we don't know now, is that it would have struck either the Capitol or the White House. The FBI believes it probably would have been the Capitol building simply because a pilot from the air would have been able to follow the tidal basin on up and down the mall, if you will, and straight into the heart of our nation's capital.
On board the hijacked aircraft, passengers continued to make phone calls. In the seat next to Tom Burnett, Mark Bingham called home.
I picked up the phone. Mom, this is Mark Bingham, he said. And he said, I just wanted to tell you that I love you.
The phone rang again on call waiting, and it was Tom. He said the hijackers were in the cockpit. And I told him about the World Trade Center, that 2 planes had flown into it, that they'd been hijacked and flown into the Trade Center.
Aboard UAL-93, word now began to spread about the attacks at the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. If the plane had not been 40 minutes late, the passengers would not have known this wasn't a normal hijacking.
We turned on the television. We saw the horrible scenes with the World Trade Center, and seeing the aircraft fly into the South Tower with the North Tower burning, I was horrified, and trying to put this together with what my son had told me only a few seconds before. And it became clear within a few minutes that it was all part of a really big mosaic of terror, and Mark was in the center of it.
Some of the passengers aboard UAL-93 were tough, athletic men. Passenger Jeremy Glick was a 31-year-old judo champ. Burnett was a 6'2" former high school quarterback. Bingham was a former college rugby player. Another passenger was a weightlifter. Those who knew them say these were not men to sit back helplessly while the hijackers attempted to use their plane as a flying bomb.
And he said, okay, they're talking about running the plane into the ground. He said, we're going to have to do something. And he hung up.
Glick told his wife the passengers took a vote to take action. Todd Beamer explained their plan.
He said that a few of them had decided to jump on the person with the bomb. I asked him, is he sure that's what he wanted to do? He said, at this point, he's going out on his faith because he don't have a choice. He's going to do what he felt that he had to do at that point.
Flight attendant Sandy Bradshaw was also part of the plan.
She said, we're in the back of the airplane. We're all going to charge up front and try to take the airplane over. We're getting hot water together to throw on them. Do you have any other ideas to help us out? And I couldn't think of anything.
He asked me to say the Lord's Prayer with him, which I did, and he said that from start to finish. At that point, he told me if he didn't make it through this, would I make him a promise and call his wife and let her know that how much he loved her and his entire family. And I told him I would, and he gave me his phone number.
She sounded like she was charged up, ready to go.
Then he turned away from the phone, but he still held the phone. And he was talking to someone else. And he said, are you ready? Okay, let's roll.
Her last words to me were, we're all running to first class. I've got to go. Bye.
And I told him I loved him. And he said, we're going to do something. And he hung up. And he never called back.
I heard commotion and screams and hollers of terror. I could hear men hollering and women screaming in the background.
And that would be the last anyone would hear from aboard United Flight 93.
They decide to keep it simple. All the photos will be copied on basic printers. The pictures will be sold to the public at $25 each. The proceeds donated to a charity for children who have suffered as a result of 9/11.
I'm buying a few remembrances for family members for Christmas that won't be able to come here and see this in person. And it's pretty disturbing. I have to fight back the tears in here.
I was in the World Trade Center when the plane hit, and I work a quarter-mile away, so I watched both of the buildings collapse. So this is sort of like coming to the wake of a good friend.
Every day people walking in with astonishing pictures. This is a heartbreaking picture. See a woman here in the hull. This is the shape of the plane. This is the hole the plane made. You can see this tiny woman here. this is exactly what the Taliban hated about our culture. I mean, they had laws against photography. Individual expression was something they tried to squelch in their culture, and this is exactly what they wanted to destroy.
On the morning of September 11th, Tim Thornsberry was working at the Hoffman coal mine outside Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
Out of the corner of my eye, I picked something up, and then I looked, and I seen a plane off to my right.
It was United Flight 93, and it appeared out of control.
Just erratically going back, wings going from side to side as it flew right over top of me. And then it, as it was it kind of come in at a slight angle, like it was going to go into the ground. And then right where that first dirt pile is, it rolled completely upside down, and it continued that way until it got to the tree line.
Housewife Paula Pluta was just finishing breakfast when Flight 93 plummeted past her house.
Like out of nowhere, I heard a very loud, roaring, rumbling noise coming from somewhere. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but it did sound like something was falling from the sky.
Pluta went out to her porch.
I saw basically just a silver streak coming and nosediving to the ground, and then a huge explosion. The actual explosion was a huge fireball, and there's a tree line separating me from the site, and the fireball was about 100 feet above the treetops.
At the same time, those who had been speaking with the passengers just before the crash clung to the line, desperate for news.
I stayed on the phone for a few minutes hoping that, but it went dead.
I held the phone for about 15 minutes, kept the line open, and I kept calling his name. No one came to the phone. About 10 minutes later, we heard over the radio that the plane United 93 had just crashed in Pittsburgh.
Pennsylvania police and emergency rescue teams were called. They had no idea what plane this was, but they raced to the location. An alert also went out to Somerset County Coroner Wallace Miller.
You have to understand that we're going through this area inch by inch.
He hurried to the scene, an abandoned strip mine. When he arrived, he couldn't believe his eyes.
It looked like someone had gouged about a 10-foot wide, 10-foot deep trough through the strip mine area. But when you looked in, it was just covered with dirt. There was nothing there that you could really say was an airplane. It was just smoking things, pieces of aircraft, just small pieces everywhere.
The voice data recorder was recovered by
the time FBI spokesman Bill Crowley arrived on the scene, it was clear that this scattered debris was all that was left of UAL-93. Working with so little evidence and with so little time, federal investigators narrowed their objectives.
Initially, the primary goal was to get two things. One was the flight data recorder and also the cockpit voice recorder. We believe that those two pieces of evidence were going to give us the best opportunity to determine what occurred on the plane prior to it going down.
The big questions facing investigators were, what exactly happened in the final minutes of Flight 93? What made the plane veer so wildly? Who was in control? And why did it nosedive into the ground? The answers may be revealed in the cockpit voice recorder, which has yet to be made public. So far, it has only been played for families of the victims. Those who have heard the tape believe that the passengers did fight back. Some of the families told New York Times reporter and author Jerry Longman what they heard.
At one point, the hijackers discussed shutting off the oxygen supply at the cabin, that it would keep the passengers from coming forward if they couldn't breathe. But they were inexperienced pilots, and they didn't know what they were doing, basically. Below 10,000 feet, it would not have affected the passengers' ability to breathe. It might have been stuffy in the cabin, but they could have breathed fine.
Those who have studied UAL-93's last moments believe the hijackers lost control as they fought with the passengers.
At 9:58, 5 minutes before the crash, you begin to hear this final fierce struggle. You can hear screaming in English and Arabic. You hear crashing sounds. What appears to be plates and glass. And from that comes the theory that the passengers were able to get into the cockpit using a food cart as a battering ram.
If the hijackers were flying the airplane and the passengers entered the cockpit, you can almost see in your mind a struggle for control. Maybe the plane moving in a porpoisey, oscillating way. That's very unstable flight.
The hijackers, at one point during the struggle, you can hear them praying. At one point they begin to talk, one asks, should we finish the flight off? And another one says, not yet. And then near the end of the flight you hear, voices, according to family members, voices that were distant and muffled become louder and clearer. And you hear words like roll it, lift it up, or turn it up, or pull it up, to which the family members have interpreted that to mean an attempt to gain control of the plane.
If they pull the hijacker out of the seat, let's say, in the struggle, in that struggle the control yoke is pushed forward, pulled back, and in the struggle the airplane just goes out of control.
Just as it is obvious that a violent struggle took place aboard UAL-93, it is also clear that the passengers never gained complete control. It has not been widely reported, but among the passengers was a pilot who, with the help of ground control, might have been able to handle the airliner. Clearly, he never got a chance to do so.
We don't know whether the plane was crashed on purpose or whether just in the chaos of the moment as they were fighting for control of the plane crashed. But we do know it began turning upside down and it was going 575 miles an hour. Near the end of the tape, you hear this really rushing, the sound of rushing wind. Some of the families have described it almost as if a window were being opened.
Yet, even if the plane had not crashed, it probably would never have reached Washington. Earlier that morning, the Pentagon scrambled fighter jets from Langley Air Force Base to protect the capital.
Those fighters from Langley got to the Pentagon after American Airlines Flight 77 hit the Pentagon. But they then began flying what's called combat air patrols, CAP flights over the city of Washington.
If UAL-93 had gotten much closer to the nation's capital, the fighter jets, armed with air-to-air missiles, would have destroyed it.
We now know, because basically the authorities have said it out loud, that had the plane continued toward Washington, they were prepared to make the decision to shoot it down. It would have been an unprecedented act in U.S. aviation. But knowing at that moment in time what they already knew, that 3 planes had crashed into 3 American buildings, they were not going to take a chance that the 4th was going to hit D.C.
But the passengers of Flight 93 saved the Pentagon from making that decision.
We believe those passengers on this jet were absolute heroes, and their actions during this flight were heroic.
But investigators still wanted to know more about the terrorists they had bested. Federal agents fanned out across the globe to uncover clues. They learned that the United States was facing an enemy far more sophisticated and deceptive than they had ever suspected.
This was a very well thought out plan that allowed them to not only avoid detection while they were doing it, but to create incredible problems piecing it together afterward.
We are fairly certain on a number of them.
As authorities attempted to put the tangled pieces together, they found that in many cases they could not even say for sure who these men were.
One of the means they used, which I think was obviously very successful, was using false identities. And we've known, of course, that it's very easy to get false passports, easy to get a driver's license under a false name, a social security number under a false name.
In fact, the identity of one of the hijackers of Flight 93 remained a mystery. The man called Saeed Al-Hamdi had stolen that identity from a Saudi Arabian commercial pilot who was still alive and living in Tunisia. Authorities also discovered a pattern of clandestine communications. The hijackers avoided telephone conversations and anything in writing. The planning of this attack on America took place in person.
The use of face-to-face meetings to convey information would have several functions. Of course, it would mean you trust somebody that you can see, and it's very important, and you leave no trail for the authorities to follow.
Nevertheless, authorities were able to uncover several details about how the attacks were planned. Ziad Al-Jarrah visited Las Vegas in June 2001 and Laurel, Maryland in August. During both trips, he apparently met with members of the terrorist cell that attacked the Pentagon. Investigators also learned that 2 of the terrorists from Flight 93 were regular visitors to the Paterson, New Jersey apartment of Hani Hanjour, the pilot of the plane that hit the Pentagon. 3 weeks after the crash of UAL-93, authorities revealed they had discovered how the hijackers got some of their weapons past security. A knife hidden inside a cigarette lighter had been found at the crash site. One piece of the puzzle that eluded investigators was why there were only 4 hijackers on UAL-93. Each of the other flights that were hijacked that day carried 5. That may have made the difference for Flight 93's hijackers.
The FBI believes there was going to be a 5th person on Flight 93, and the failure of that 5th hijacker to show up probably left the hijackers undermanned. That left 2 in the cockpit and only 2 to maintain the passengers. That proved not to be enough.
What happened to the 5th hijacker? Since the attacks, the investigations have centered around this man, Zacarias Moussaoui. He took flying lessons at this school in Oklahoma. During the summer of 2001, he asked for time at a flight simulator near Minneapolis. But when he said he only wanted to learn how to steer, not to take off or to land, instructors became alarmed. They called the FBI, who detained him for questioning. When the FBI discovered passport violations, Moussaoui was arrested. That was in late August, less than 3 weeks before the hijackings.
It was simply too late to get a replacement, and it would have been too risky.
As investigators sifted through the rubble of United Flight 93 and the much wider devastation at the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, one thing became clear. The heroism of the passengers aboard Flight 93 saved hundreds of lives.
One of my coworkers looked up and he said, "What is that plane doing?" We knew it was in the Pentagon area, but we weren't exactly sure where it had crashed. So we put on our sirens and they responded to the area. So once we got there, smoke, flames everywhere. And I remember it just felt like everything was moving in slow motion. We were trying to move quick, but it was so unreal that it just felt like I was just moving very slow. You know, wanting to save people, but there's no one to save. So that was pretty tough. Some people call us crazy because we run in while everybody's running out, but it's because we really, truly love what we do.
America is the land of the free and home of the brave.
Proud to be an American, and that's what it's all about, you know?
You know, America has always been the symbol of freedom and patriotism.
The American dream is alive, more now than ever.
My husband's name is Mark Rasweiler. He worked at the World Trade Center in the North Tower on the 100th floor.
I had called up my office to tell them that we hadn't heard from my father yet, and they said, you know, if there's anything we can do, let us know, you know, we'll do whatever we can. I said, actually, if you could scan in my father's photograph, we want to look for him.
Her art department set up this whole flyer in less than an hour, and we were
had it copied and we were off.
I think the posters stayed on the wall so long because it became a memorial, and I think people didn't want to take those pictures down. They didn't want to forget.
If it helped bring some hope to other families, and I'm glad it was able to help.
On September 11th, terrorists tried to change America forever. Well, they succeeded.
Flight 93, along with the other hijacked planes that crashed on September 11th, had no survivors. But through the phone conversations the passengers had with their loved ones, it's now known we've been given a new definition of the word hero. And while the country embraced them and mourned for them, their families now had to find ways to move forward without them.
It's pretty tough to think, you know, I had all this planned out and all these dreams set involving Nicole, and now, you know, she's not here. So what do I do now? How do I carry it on? It's, I guess, something that I'll just have to, you know, find in myself day by day.
I still feel so much pain and so much grief that I'm almost afraid to make a decision right now about our future, afraid that I'll make the wrong decision.
I have the bittersweet good fortune of having lost my son in a famous and horrible event. My son's passing has been marked by the world, and I'm very grateful to all the people that I've met who have expressed their affection and love for Mark.
Within weeks of the tragedy, memorial services for the heroes of Flight 93 were held all over the country. Friends, family, and politicians came to pay their final respects.
I never knew Mark Bingham, but I wish I had. I know he was a good son and friend, a good rugby player, a good American, and an extraordinary human being.
I want to say that she was a very good mother, and I loved her dearly. And, well, I'm happy because she's in heaven.
At a special memorial at the crash site in Pennsylvania, First Lady Laura Bush, accompanied by Director of Homeland Security Tom Ridge, comforted the grieving families of the victims.
All of us as Americans share in this grief. The burden is greatest, however, for the families, those of you who are with us today. America is learning the names, but you know the people. And you are the ones they thought of in the last moments of life. You're the ones they called and prayed to see again. You're the ones they loved.
Today we gather to remember the brave Americans who died on United Flight 93. And we vow publicly that our nation will never forget their names.
Long after the memorials are over, the families of the victims will still be in mourning. But they'll never forget how their loved ones reached out to them in those final phone calls, and what the passengers did in the last moments of Flight 93.
I believe that Mark was being calm, and he loved his family more than anything, and he had the opportunity to one time tell us again, even though we knew it. I think he was saying goodbye to us, knowing that what his actions perhaps were going to do were going to be the end.
I would call him a hero. I think what he did and what the others did was very admirable. And if anyone is deserving of that term, they are.
I think everybody on that flight was a hero. You know, there was a handful that got to call their relatives or talk to someone. But yes, they were all heroes, and they kept that airplane from going any further than it did.